everyone, welcome to MotorInc, and this is ThisConnect.
This is a podcast, as you can tell, and what we're going to be sharing mostly are our thoughts on various things. And the thing that is really bugging me today is electric vehicles.
I think a lot of this is going to be the conversations that we have one-on-one about whatever we're experiencing, and so it's a little bit more unfiltered and a little bit more of a deeper dive in that sense, right?
Yeah, I'd say, but it gets censored, so I won't. Let's get to it.
All right, we're talking about
Electric vehicles.
Shumi's favorite topic.
I love them.
Yeah. Really?
In 10 years' time from now.
That's where it goes.
You know, because of the way I've behaved with electric vehicles, I've been accused of loving petrols and diesels too much. Petrols mostly because I don't do cars. But that's not right. The fact is, they're not as good as a good petrol today by and large. There are exceptions. If you had the chance to ride the Harley-Davidson Livewire,
All right.
or drive one of the faster electric cars, they are spectacularly good, and you can see that they will be better than petrols in literally a matter of years to come.
Right.
But today, the idea that they are going to be the solution to all of the problems,
Right.
I mean, that's just bullshit. Do you think it is the solution?
I think there's a very interesting situation here, which is the difference between the two-wheeler world and the four-wheeler world. Because I think what happened in the two-wheeler space was that a lot of fly-by-night operators or people who weren't really automotive people came in and started selling EVs while they weren't really making them or engineering them. So we ended up getting a lot of options. Yeah, you could say that. Right, which really...
I'm only following your lead. You said unfiltered, so I said crap.
Right, so we can call them that because they were really not what you would want an automobile to be in the sense of being reliable, dependable, long-lasting, all of that, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in the case of four-wheelers, because that market is just stuck to global standards in that sense, right? The expectations are right up there. There's very little that you can play around with. So even if you look at the more mass market offerings that you have, right, they are solid. They're really solid. And on the other hand, there haven't been that many options because to make a four-wheeler electric takes a lot. You know, you can't just go and buy a shopping cart somewhere and assemble it at some factory.
Don't give them ideas, man. I'll tell you why. My first ever EV experience. This is real. People call and they said, we are in the Andheri industrial area. That's not too far from my house. I go there and there's a CBZ with a battery and everything.
Right.
I said, okay. He said, so we're battery manufacturers. They used to do emergency lights.
All right.
And it's not too difficult. So we can do an electric vehicle. So we took this CBZ and we modified it. I said, okay. I'm riding inside the complex. It's 150 meters straight. I'm making a U-turn and the front forks fell out of the motorcycle.
That wasn't a battery problem.
They fell out of the motorcycle. I'm not kidding.
Right.
So suddenly the handlebar goes loose in my hand and I'm like, what happened? Luckily, I'm only 150 meters away, right? So they come running.
So
they're like,
pick up the two forks and like just walk back.
No, so the thing is, there are battery manufacturers, so they only have storage space for the boxes of the emergency lights. So they can't store a motorcycle. This is a business that wants to get into motorcycle manufacturing, and this is many years ago, okay?
Right.
So they disassemble the motorcycle every night into boxes and put it in the other boxes which contain emergency lights. So today morning, when they said a journalist is coming and he'll ride the bike, somebody forgot to tighten the pinch bolts.
That's hilarious.
I mean, I came this close to saying to Rehne tere se nahi hoga.
But I think that's also a very interesting point. That I think people tend to forget when they think about EVs. And EVs have simplified the design or let's say the architecture that's required, right? I think people forget that there is some core engineering required to make a good product.
Yeah.
Right? To make a, if you think about weight distribution or chassis or just how the suspension works, all of that changes. It's ridiculous when you think about manufacturers and they're talking about EVs coming up and tire guys are like, hey, we're going to have to develop tires a little bit differently now because the tires just have to deal with more weight as standard, right?
Yeah.
So that's a factor. But would you normally think about that unless you were already in the business of making vehicles, right?
And that's the thing. I think everybody thinks that batteries, we've dealt with batteries for literally a century now, right? Yeah. How hard could it be? We've dealt with motors for a century now. So how hard could it be? Turns out it can be very hard.
It's definitely not easy.
Yeah, that engineering method, it's a 4-letter acronym, which I think we've used on the show already. It's called CRAP. That method doesn't work.
All right.
You have to do proper engineering again. I remember driving cars around the Shanghai circuit at one of the challenge bibendums where they used to have future vehicles. Now they just talk. That event has changed. But earlier there'd be a lot of future vehicles, including fuel cells.
Right.
And when we were driving the electrics, we were always warned that it looks, for example, like an X-Trail. I think it was a Nissan X-Trail that I'm remembering now.
Right.
Yeah. It looks like an X-Trail, but this thing is 600 kilos heavier than the usual one.
Right.
So you can't push it like you do a normal SUV. And this is, I'm talking again, 10, 15 years before EVs became a thing.
Right.
So if you think about it, EVs are a solution, yes. Eventually we'll move to EVs, yes. But I don't think it's a timeline that follows the same path across segments.
Yeah.
Like scooters. Should you have an electric scooter today?
I think very much.
Yeah.
Very doable.
Yeah, I agree. Ather is a great example of having it in production and running. And there's other people who are doing a reasonable amount of business in there, including Ola now that they've sort of sorted out most of their niggles.
Actually, my favorite? The iQube.
Yeah.
I just think they've taken the TVS Jupiter and they've made an electric version of that. If they just called it the Jupiter EV, it would just make complete sense.
And they fit exactly, right? Because your scooter is an urban vehicle, which means the area that it covers on an average day is known. It stays within infrastructure. We know this. And it's used for short trips with or without load. We know this. All of which adapts really well.
Right.
And just imagine the change when you hit a motorcycle with the same formula.
Yeah. In this regard, I think the one thing that I would want to point out, and the reason why, we're talking about Ather and TVS as, right on the top of our minds right now, is because of the one thing that they managed to do, and that is to build trust in an environment which is largely trust deficient, right? Fair to say that?
I don't think it's trust deficient as much as it's impatient because of the way they're funding their businesses.
Okay.
So for example, if you were to build an EV, and I think you're a calm, sorted, thoughtful person, you would give me a reasonable timeline saying, okay, I'm going to need 5 years to do this. And if I was a venture funding guy who understood that this is a 5-year process to build out a production-ready, awesome vehicle, I'd give you the 5 years. But it feels like very few people have that liberty today, right? If you think about the Indian market, we are nearly the largest market on earth overall. We are the largest two-wheeler market. So the opportunity is literally endless. And in some ways, if you build a good EV today, tomorrow, 2 years from now, or 5 years from now, it's not like the opportunity is going to taper off.
Right.
But it's like everybody's in a rush to show you what they're up to before it should really be shown to public. If I had a cookery show that followed the same format, every time I'd cut an onion, I'd call you into the kitchen and say, see what I've done, now give me more money. It doesn't make any sense. That's how tears happen.
Okay, I'm coming back to the point that these two vehicles that we're talking about are the ones that when they promise a particular range, you're pretty much at that mark more often than not.
Correct.
You're not getting much deviation. So in that sense, you can depend on your product to perform in a particular manner.
Yep.
And which makes it a part of your life.
And I think range anxiety exists more for people who don't have an EV already than for the guys who do have an EV.
Exactly.
Right? If I were to tell you that from today onwards, you'd get to eat only 30% of the food you normally consume. As a human being who adapts, you would learn how to deal with that.
Right.
So if you buy an Ather and it says it'll last 85, first of all, it does last 85.
Yeah.
Same with the iQube, and that's a huge thing.
And now we have the Gen 3.
Now we have the Gen 3. And just to give you a counter example, early Olas, the range predictions were off. And I know somebody personally who left for their office with 30 kilometers of range showing, 7 kilometers to the office. It was stuck outside a petrol pump some 3 kilometers down the line. And he could not understand how a scooter that was supposed to deliver that day's journey didn't do it.
Right.
So some trust was lost that day for that gentleman and that brand. But range anxiety is larger when you haven't got an EV yet, because in a car, 5 minutes later, you can top it up and continue to move on a petrol or diesel or on a bike.
Right.
On an EV, it's the charging speed that is the biggest stumbling block in this whole picture.
Right.
Just being able to tell you how much it will do
Correct.
changes everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, 30-kilometer commute back and forth in my Pune house. 28 kilometers on warp mode. 32 kilometers left on warp mode. And I would take that Ather with eyes closed and ride it in warp all the way home and back and always charge at work. My building was 24 stories, so it was very difficult. But it would do this every single day.
Right.
But for somebody who's riding their KTM home or something and they look at me and say, that thing's only got like 32 kilometers of range. Are you sure about this?
Right.
I am.
Yeah.
And it changes everything.
And in that sense, I think that's where a little bit of a dampener is there when it comes to EVs, is that flexibility, especially when we're talking about scooters, which are, let's say, family vehicles in that sense. The dad rides it in, the son takes it out, the mom takes it out, somebody's always on the go, and you just say, okay, I'll fill it up, right?
Yeah.
Whereas when it becomes an EV, you have to get into the habit or of charging it every time you get somewhere or get home,
But I think it's a great way to build a family, right? Because when you get a dog, it's like the children are supposed to feed the dog and take care of the dog and walk the dog, and then we'll get the dog, right? We'll get an EV, you guys charge it, and the parents will ride it. I mean, it's participatory, it's democratic, and I think it's division of labor.
Right.
Children, electricity, no, maybe that's not such a good idea, actually.
They said dogs were the new kids recently. That's what I heard. So in this sense, you're saying...
no, a dog is not plugging an EV into charging. Okay, that's not going to happen.
But this is part of the family as well, right?
Look, we're in a society where even putting a dog on a floorboard can be misconstrued today.
Right.
So let's not bring dogs into this, okay? It's just a very, very difficult topic.
I don't know where we went to dogs on floorboards. Don't do that, right?
Yeah. We were talking about motorcycles versus scooters as electric vehicles. And I think whatever we've seen of motorcycles so far, it's going to be a long haul.
Yeah.
Not for the motorcycles itself. They can't do long hauls yet. For the owners of the motorcycles.
Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah. But before we move to the motorcycles, I think there was something very interesting that you said then about, getting used to something. And rather the people who don't have EVs are the ones who have the anxiety. The people who have EVs have acclimatized.
Yeah.
And I think that is also something that plays into the mindset of people when they're thinking about EVs, because most people who are talking about EVs, as likely as not, have not ridden or driven one.
That's true for the entire internet. Okay. Most people offering expert opinion on the internet have gone nowhere close to the subject of what they're offering expert opinion on. So we shouldn't be surprised by this. I mean, keyboard racing is an intelligent, functional, productive pastime. Human beings have come so far keyboard racing. So why shouldn't they be keyboard racing this?
Right. Okay. So coming back to the topic, I think the point is that if you have preconceptions about EVs not being fun, I think that being one of the...
Huge fun.
Exactly.
Huge fun. Even the worst of them, when for that moment the throttle calibration works and the battery charge state is in its sweet spot, I promise you, it's a future. You see a glimpse of it and you're like, damn, I want that.
Yeah. And on that, another pro tip, if you're comparing ICE to EVs and you're looking at the spec sheet and you're looking at, this has 7 horsepower and this has 7 horsepower, trust us, the EV horsepower is different from the ICE horsepower. It just is. I don't know how, why, but I mean, it's because of the torque, yeah. But the point is the way you get the performance.
And if you're racing spec sheets, just grow up.
So yeah, keep that in mind. So don't look at the spec sheet and be put off by something. Drive. And once you drive an EV, and if this has happened to you, that you've driven or ridden an EV and you had certain notions about it, did they change? If they did, let us know in the comments. If they didn't, also let us know in the comments. Would be great to hear what you thought about it, right?
Yeah.
And coming to the excitement part, and that's where the motorcycles come in, and that's where there's a bit of a speed bump.
The fundamental thing about a motorcycle is that we want to ride it. And the fundamental problem with EVs today is when the ride gets over because your battery ran out, charging takes a while. Charging infrastructure will definitely take even longer. Because we see petrol pumps every day and we assume that that's normal. But it's taken us 100 and something years to get to a place where there's a petrol pump everywhere. And I'm sure that we'll both be skeletons in our graves, I think. But at that point of time, there were charging stations everywhere too.
Okay, on that note, do you know when the first petrol station was set up in India?
No, but I can tell you when the last petrol pump will close on Earth.
Okay, hit me with that one first.
Not anytime soon.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's absolutely true, I think. But, the first petrol station in India was set up in Kolkata in 1929.
Right.
and it wasn't even like an official presence. We're going to link to the article where we saw that, right? And it's really cool to read about it because it's still operating 93 years later, and it's really cool about it. It's a family-run petrol pump. So pretty cool that way. The point is, petrol pumps have been...
So is it part of the UNESCO Heritage Program, something?
It should be, yeah. I mean, if not UNESCO. But actually, they treat it that way. The family that runs it actually treats it that way. They say this is part of the history, right? So they have persevered to have the petrol pump stay where it is, as is, because they say this is part of history. So it's pretty cool.
So your neighborhood charging station, you may want to have a lot more respect for it than you do, because 93 years from now, two old fogies will be sitting across the table and saying, remember the first charging station? Can we move on?
Yeah, so the point is we've had about 100 years to populate petrol stations across the country, right? And as a kid, I remember we used to be driving across Maharashtra, right, for summer vacations, from Kaboli to Nagpur.
That's his family, not him.
Yeah, I mean, back then I couldn't drive. But it used to be, you had to plan for where would you get the petrol, right? It was a thing you had to factor in, right?
Correct.
Because there were petrol pumps, but it's not like they were littered around the place where you were like, no worries, I can get to reserve and then fuel up, right? You would, as likely as not, carry a jerry can with you just in case.
Sure.
Which is not the case today.
No, today I want to carry batteries around.
Yeah.
They're just too heavy.
But, and no, we're not carrying batteries around.
No? Okay,
they're far too expensive.
Let's move on. The core point of this is motorcycles as they exist as electric vehicles today, they don't work. They don't give you the flexibility that is core to the sport of motorcycling. You get the risk, and I love it. You will fall off an electric motorcycle and hurt yourself just as much as you would falling off a petrol, and it's fine. Many of them corner just as well or better than electric petrol vehicles today. And yes, that's how it's supposed to be. But if I can't leave town at the drop of a hat and go for a ride whenever I feel like to wherever I feel like, it's not a motorcycle yet, it's a scooter without storage.
Because it's about freedom.
It is.
Absolutely.
Right? Cars are a different thing.
Cars are
And
quite...
I think today, if you already have an ICE powered car in your garage, you're definitely ready to have an EV in your life, a secondary vehicle. Scooter or car is not important. But if you have a way to get around without the restrictions of range, today's car EVs work.
Yeah. I don't think you have the concerns of longevity and reliability aspects as we've seen in the mass market for scooters in India. We have Tata, now we have Mahindra, who's thrown their hat into the ring as well with the XUV 300, which is coming soon. Yeah. And you can be pretty sure that they will be, I mean, the XUV will be a solid offering as well, right? Because they have a lot of experience that they've already got from having had Reva. And Tata, in that sense...
but didn't Mahindra miss the boat a little bit? I mean, they had EV technology years ago, but they weren't the first to the market with an EV.
Yeah, it's a fair question, but I think it's too soon to say somebody's missed the boat. It's
in terms of being first, not in terms of being a great EV manufacturer. In terms of they could have been first because they already acquired a company that was doing that job.
Right.
And in some ways they didn't really capitalize on it, and the E2O etc. sort of dropped off the radar.
Right.
Then the E-Verito became a taxi.
Right.
And now you have to invent a brand called what is it called? B.
B is their new all-electric brand, yeah.
Yeah, so the B will create the buzz, but you understand what I'm saying?
No, absolutely. I think weren't they the first movers? Great question. I really don't have an answer for that. I think that part of a company being acquired and integrated and how that works internally, I think somewhere to that effect. And in that sense, I think if you look at what Mahindra's been doing with their ICE range, right, and for that we've seen huge strides being made there. I think somewhere their focus was there. Let's get the bread and butter fixed on that front, and then we attack this area as well. Interestingly, Tata Motors had gone a slightly different way. They set up a startup within the company, which was for electric mobility. And I think that in that sense, it paid huge dividends for them because Shailesh Chandra, who used to head that unit, is now heading passenger cars, right? So he's the guy in the driving seat, and that very clearly says where the direction, intention, and focus is.
And I think a lot of other manufacturers are also now giving us hints about direction, right? We remember you and I were together when we spoke to Siddharth from Royal Enfield.
Right.
And he was very clear that it will soon be time to wind up investing in future development for IC vehicles because it's looking more and more like a sunset market. Doesn't mean production will stop.
Right.
It means future growth of those engines, those lines will not make financial sense to invest in.
Right.
And when somebody the size of Royal Enfield starts to say that, you have to imagine that Bajaj is probably thinking the same way, although they're not expressing themselves like that. And so is probably Honda and Suzuki and somebody else. And the natural death of the ICE from development will come from the fact that they're now focusing their energies onto electrics instead.
And just for a little bit of a explainer, so to speak, because just look at the timelines that manufacturers have to work with. They would be developing a product for 4 or 5 years, right?
And the platforms for 10.
Yeah, and that then has to run another 5-7 years. So you're talking about a 12-year period, which in this case, in our current environment that we're in, it just won't add up. They would be revising existing platforms.
Yeah, which is to make a very clean point, which is if you're 14, 15, 16 years old and you think, wow, petrols are so awesome and what is going on with these stupid electrics, don't stress. You will have the opportunity to drive petrols, diesels, motorcycles and cars
right,
when you get a license and maybe 5-8 years after that. The actual time when it'll all be EVs and you won't be able to find petrols and diesels, I think it'll be your kids who will actually see that world arrive. I mean, in that sense, we are lucky, right? Because when we started testing, there weren't that many cars or motorcycles at all.
Right.
We'd have a week to test everything. We're at the other end, right? Where in a week we have to test 10 things.
Right.
It's one of the things that we are trying to figure out how to make more meaning in the sense of I can't physically test 10 vehicles a week. It's nonsense. My stories stink because of it, right? Now we are seeing the transition to EVs and we have to relearn a lot of what we think testing needs to work like. So interior space of a car, seat height of a bike, yes, those tenets apply. How power delivery works, how range works, how range is depleted as you use it is a whole different discussion. But what I'd like to move forward to is how is recycling all the elements that are going into these vehicles? And soon there will be accumulations because now we have 5, 6, 7-year-old EVs which will be nearing the ends of their battery lives. What's going on there? Because there's not enough chatter, I think, about the fact that there is a serious source of pollution coming.
Right.
And another 10 years from now, there's a serious load of batteries coming which will now have to be recycled, reused, reemployed.
I think resources is the biggest issue when it comes to talking about EVs. So is it the answer in that sense? I think that can soundly be said as no, but it is in a sense the best alternative for the time being.
How?
As the way
this
forward.
Is like the Indian household mentality, right? If the kachra is outside my house, then we are good.
No,
because think about it. What is the EV doing today in India, where coal is powering a large part of it? It's turning your electric vehicle into a coal-powered vehicle, which is a backward step in terms of overall energy efficiency. It's taking the pollution elsewhere. I understand that population is densely situated in a city and cleaning up a city affects a large number of people positively. I get it. But that also has the opportunity for people to become complacent because, hey, my city is cleaner. You know, when COVID cleaned up everybody's air, for that 5 minutes, we forgot about COVID and we said, wow, look at the air, look at the Himalayas. I can see them from Amritsar or whatever it was. It was a diversion. And to me, a significant number of EVs in the urban environment can represent a diversion where the pollution problem is a little bit remote. So how much work we have to do on it can also be a little bit less.
Right. I think there is an argument for that in the sense that where the pollution is being made is centralized. So in that sense, it is easier to control. So that where, even if you're talking about coal, right, and the point being that if it is created in one source, you have fewer points to attack to clean things up, right? So
like the source of the battery raw material, like.
Yeah, so battery raw material is a very, that's a tough one, right? I mean, considering that it's requiring. So I think as we talk about why are we moving to electricity? It's because you want to go to renewable energy.
No, it's because we are tired of the people who are controlling the crude supplies for the earth. So we want to move to the guys who control the lithium supplies for the earth.
From an energy standpoint, it's because you can move to something that's renewable. When it comes to fuel, all of it is finite. And similarly, like you said, for the lithium and the nickel and the cobalt,
You know what is completely renewable? Is the solar energy.
and all of that.
walking.
Yes.
It's not sustainable though. So
That's
we still
the
have to
problem.
we still have to
I
figure
mean,
out.
if you ask people to just replace a weekly commute onto a cycle or something else, you can bet that people will be like, it's fine. I'll take
Yeah, you guys should totally do it so I have more time to ride motorcycle.
Yeah, there you go. We have one right here. So I think electrics, yes, but I think in the near term, right now, if you look at what makes as a great sensible solution, and we are seeing some of those already happening in India, is by way of strong hybrids, right? We are seeing cars on offer today, which are fantastic solution because it doesn't necessitate a household to have two vehicles, right? One, like let's say an EV is your city car and which you use through the week, and one car which is for your long drives or for your weekends, so you don't have to worry about that. Strong hybrids have proved that they can give you incredible efficiency, right? While giving you all the flexibility also that you want within with your family car in that sense. So I think there are interesting solutions that are coming in.
So you're saying EVs may be the long-term solution, but today maybe they're not always the right solution.
Thank you. And on that note, I think we are looking at, when we talk about EVs, we automatically think about BEVs or battery electric vehicles. We have to think wider, as somewhere they're called as XEVs, right? So whether it's plug-in hybrid electric vehicles or just strong hybrid electric vehicles or then BEVs, right? There are these other solutions which are also available, which for a market in transition, right, are great solutions. And especially we have to, like you have Netherlands, right, where I think EV adoption is 69% or something like that.
So they move from cycles to scooters.
So they
it's not a serious question.
Okay. Actually, anyways, the point is that where you have a smaller landmass, right, it's easier to make those changes. Right?
Yeah.
Whereas a country like India,
Man, it's crazy.
it's going to be crazy to get charging infrastructure anywhere and everywhere.
It's not just the landmass. I think it's also the number of people.
Yeah.
It's the historical vehicle population. Like, I mean, the joke is air pollution isn't caused by the current car. It's caused by the 80% of all cars which are now more than 5 or 8 years old, and therefore they don't meet anywhere close to the current emission standard.
Right.
If you were to replace those commercial vehicles especially, you'd get a huge dent in your in air pollution straight away without even thinking about the EV impact, right? It's not a solvable problem though. You can't tell 80% of what, 1.3, 1.4 billion people.
1.4,
Yeah, you can't tell 80% of the commercial vehicles that are used by 1.4 billion people saying, that's it, you're off the road from tomorrow. I mean, what are you going to do as a replacement?
And the commercial vehicles thing is particularly a trip because we rely on them. We don't realize it, but they are running 24/7.
Correct.
Right? Because they are the ones that are transporting goods or fuel or vegetables or whatever. They are the ones that are pressed into duty 24/7.
Correct.
And if those aren't clean,
yeah,
it's a tough one.
Big deal. So let's summarize this. Is electric vehicle the future? I think yes. In time, the coal as a source will change. You'll get other renewable sources. India's been working really hard on it, as are many other people. And I think that is pretty much a given. Will it happen in your lifetime? I wouldn't worry about it too much. We are still, I think, 25, 30 years from a time where EVs are so popular and so everywhere that ICEs, diesels, petrols, motorcycles are a big challenge. And I think we'll talk about it in our next podcast. Are EVs fun? I think unequivocally, yes, they are. When you get it right, the torque, the way they feel, even the silence, it has its own charm.
absolutely.
And the charm of the silence is something that I don't know how to communicate, right?
You know, it's a dream of mine, an off-road motorcycle, which you use to go through trails. Imagine moving that silently through that environment. It will
Dude,
be like a dream.
I'd give you my left arm and leg to go on a trek with a guy who doesn't have a speaker dangling from his backpack singing Jinchak songs in the middle of absolute natural silence.
He's baiting me here because it's happened with me on a trek. He suggested what I should do, but I can't tell you what that was right now. We were close to a cliff, let's just say that. Yeah, okay, moving on.
You should kick a lot more.
Oh. The Kickstarters are gone. So we are back to just thumb starts. I mean, we're at thumb starts. Okay, one more thing. We are always looking at things as this or that, right? So we're going from ICE to EVs. So we're looking at electrification. But I think the one thing that we have to accept is that there will be a plurality of energy sources. And I think that is part of this future that we have.
Yeah.
Because no matter which resource we choose, if we choose only the one resource to be the solution,
Right.
I think that resource is going to be scarce.
Yeah, I think I'm going to quote Tarun Mehta here to explain this idea a little bit. Tarun is, of course, the head of Ather. And what Tarun said, the reason why the ICE needs to be replaced is because it's one of the least efficient ways of using energy that humanity is still continuing to use.
Correct.
Right? Most industry today runs on electricity, and we're talking 85-90% efficiency. ICEs barely hit 50%, and an ICE that hits 50% is doing a spectacular job of managing energy. Right?
Yeah.
That's the reason why it needs to be replaced. And the reason why that plurality idea is important is because how you power the car isn't important. Where the power comes from is just as important. The motor and the battery together, you'll get your 90% efficiency. Not a big deal. It'll happen. But if that energy is coming from a dirty source or an inefficient source or both, you've not really moved the needle. Which is why it is critical that renewables work. It is critical that renewables work well. And it is crucial that we move away from the traditional, dirtier, less efficient ways of making energy, like burning coal, for example. So, EVs, yes or no?
For me, yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying not today.
I'm on.
You know what's outside?
Yeah, I know what's outside.
What's outside?
39 cc's of 200 horsepower.
Yeah, so I like to boast about this because I'm really proud of this, but we built the office so that we could bring our bikes inside. So the reason why I'm pointing this out is because he's got his Hayabusa on the other side of the wall behind me.
He's got his Duke.
And my KTM Duke is standing next to it, and it makes it the classiest office I've ever worked in. And now we are deviating. So let me just set up the idea for the next podcast, which is there's a technology on its way that will slowly prevent you from riding your motorcycle completely. This is ThisConnect.
Exactly.
Hey, 100%. This
Maybe
is
not in his lifetime.
Hello, ThisConnect G. Disconnect.
Okay.